Hello, and welcome to the NAMB webinar on the Standards for Cultural Safety. Cultural safety is a foundational concept that moves beyond cultural awareness and sensitivity. It is practice expectations that begin with self-awareness and a commitment to reflecting and creating relationships and environments where clients feel safe and respected. The new Standards for Cultural Safety were published in 2025, and they set the minimum expectation for nurses in the delivery of culturally safe care. For this reason, this year's CCP mandatory learning module will focus on the components of the Standards for Cultural Safety to help registrants better understand their professional responsibilities and practice expectations. This webinar will be approximately 15 minutes in length. NAMB recognizes and respectfully acknowledges that we live and work on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional lands of Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which the Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. The purpose of this module is to give nurses a strong foundational understanding of the standards for cultural safety. This includes a deeper understanding of the guiding concepts, principles, and what is expected in practice. By the end of this module, registrants should be able to understand why cultural safety is important, define cultural safety, understand and reflect on the 7 core principles that NAMB outlines for safe and respectful care, and to differentiate between the broad standards for cultural safety, which are intended for all nurse-client relationships, and those specific to working with Indigenous clients. Research indicates that 1 in 4 Canadians report experiencing discrimination in healthcare settings. Discrimination includes prejudice based on race, religion, ethnic origin, language, health condition, age, ability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. The frequency of reported discrimination in healthcare settings signifies that these are not rare or isolated incidents. Because of this, many individuals develop mistrust toward the system, and some even choose to avoid care altogether for fear of being dismissed, misunderstood, or harmed. Experiences of discrimination that lead to unsafe care and poor health outcomes may be individual occurrences, but many of the drivers of discrimination are also systemic. These are often structural and embedded within policies, dominant cultural values, and power imbalances between the healthcare provider and client. All of these factors create additional barriers to culturally safe healthcare provision. The status quo can be changed and action can be taken to redress culturally unsafe healthcare experiences. Cultural safety is both a process and an outcome based on respectful engagement. It recognizes and strives to address power imbalances inherent in the healthcare system. It begins with self-reflection and a commitment to developing client-centered relationships. Importantly, cultural safety is only achieved when the client perceives it as such. The intentions or perceptions of the provider do not determine it. Cultural safety aims to promote an environment free of racism and discrimination, where people feel safe, valued, and heard when receiving health care. Cultural safety was originally conceptualized with an understanding that the ways in which nurses interact with clients significantly influence whether a client will seek or avoid healthcare services. Cultural safety also highlights the influences of power dynamics and covert structures of colonization and oppression within healthcare systems that must be addressed so that systemic change can occur. The principles of cultural safety are expected to be applied to all practice settings and all nurse-client relationships. These 5 principles and associated indicators outline the accountabilities and responsibilities of nurses to optimize culturally safe, competent, compassionate, and ethical nursing care. Self-awareness, relational awareness, client-led relationship, trauma and violence-informed care, safe healthcare experiences. Each of these principles will be defined later in this webinar. 2 additional principles have been developed to address Indigenous peoples' unique histories, rights, and healthcare experiences. These 2 Indigenous-specific principles are journey of learning and respect for Indigenous identity and knowledge. All 7 principles, the 5 aforementioned principles for all nurse-client relationships, and the 2 Indigenous-specific principles are intended to be applied in all practice settings and all relationships with Indigenous clients receiving care, along with their families and support networks. All nurses are responsible for being part of reconciliation. The current state of Indigenous health in Canada is as a direct result of previous Canadian government policies as per the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action. Canada's colonial laws and policies, including the Indian Act, Indian residential school systems, forced dislocation from traditional lands and relocation to reserves, the criminalization of languages and cultural ceremonies, and the denial of treaty rights have had enduring negative impacts on the health and well-being of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. These are a few of the terms that underlie these standards. The first is cultural awareness. This is the acknowledgement and observance of cultural differences. Cultural awareness focuses on seeing beyond one's culture and understanding that many forms of culture coexist. The next is cultural humility. This is a process of self-reflection that aims to understand personal and systemic biases and develop and maintain respectful processes and relationships based on mutual trust. Cultural humility involves humbly acknowledging oneself as a learner when understanding another's experience. Cultural awareness and humility contribute to cultural sensitivity. This involves exhibiting behaviors that are considered polite and respectful by the person who has cultural differences from your own. Ultimately, the goal is to provide culturally safe care. Culturally safe care is a refinement of cultural safety concept. Nurses do everything they can to provide culturally safe care, but they remain aware that they are in a position of power in nurse-client relationships, and some clients may never feel entirely safe. Nurses allow those who receive care to determine what they consider to be safe. The first foundational principle is self-awareness. Nurses understand that cultural safety begins with self-awareness and critical self-reflection. They commit to examining their own reality, values, attitudes, beliefs, biases, and assumptions, recognizing how these influence practice and interactions with clients, families, and communities. Relational awareness. Nurses recognize that while cultural safety is a client-defined outcome, they play a key role in creating the conditions for culturally safe care. Nurses cultivate self-awareness, sensitivity, and humility before the onset of nurse-client relationships, and contribute to inclusive, respectful, and culturally safe practice environments. Nurses utilize an intersectional approach to recognize how overlapping factors such as race, gender, class, and ability shape clients' experiences and access to care. Client-led relationship. Nurses foster a nurse-client relationship that strives for culturally safe care and is underpinned by an understanding of the client's experience, needs, and expectations, mutual trust, and respect. Trauma and violence-informed care. Nurses recognize that trauma, whether interpersonal, historical, intergenerational, or systemic, has lasting impacts on health, well-being, and trust in healthcare systems. Nurses incorporate approaches informed by trauma and violence-informed care into nurse-client relationships. They create conditions for healing by promoting physical, emotional, cultural, and spiritual safety, supporting client choice and autonomy, and building trusting relationships grounded in empathy, transparency, and collaboration. Healthcare experiences. Nurses contribute to safe healthcare experiences beyond the individual client encounter. Through their actions, influence, and professional responsibilities, nurses work to identify and address the root causes of unsafe care, such as systemic racism, discrimination, or exclusionary policies. Nurses promote inclusion and equity, including advocating for organizational and structural change that enhances culturally safe systems. Journey of learning. Nurses build knowledge through ongoing education and a commitment to lifelong learning to understand the connection between the historical and ongoing treatment of Indigenous people and current health outcomes. This journey of learning includes understanding the impact of colonialism, respecting Indigenous peoples' diverse histories, languages, and traditions, and appreciating that treaties and laws established to create a sovereign and distinctive socio-political space for Indigenous peoples. This learning may cause discomfort with shifting perspectives of previously held beliefs or prior knowledge. Nurses have a responsibility to recognize that colonialism, trauma, and prior experiences may affect clients' views, access, and interactions within healthcare systems, and understand that each client's experience is unique. Respect for Indigenous identity and knowledge. Nurses demonstrate respect for Indigenous identity within nurse-client relationships when clients self-identify. Nurses offer the choice to incorporate values and traditions into nurse-client interactions and advocate for and support initiatives that honor and preserve traditional Indigenous health practices at the organizational and system level. Nurses can demonstrate respect and empathy for Indigenous clients by seeking to understand the client's lived experience and through being open to learning from Indigenous clients, their families, community members, Indigenous colleagues, elders, and knowledge keepers. It is important that this principle is also applied not only in the individual nurse-client relationship, but also within the organizational and systemic levels. Nurses must advocate for Indigenous consultation and engagement in organizational policy development, planning, processes, and decision-making. Although each principle builds upon the last, it is important to note that cultural safety is not a linear process with a fixed endpoint. Each nurse has a unique learning journey in creating and contributing to environments that support cultural safety. NAMB's Cultural Safety Toolkit is intended to support registrants understand and succeed in applying the standards for cultural safety into their practice. It includes both guidance and resources to support nurses to integrate these principles into their practice. Here are some strategies that can be used in a learning journey to support culturally safe care. Writing in a journal weekly to reflect on what you learned or have been challenged by. Checking your bias before and after client care, thinking about the assumptions you are making. Having a chat with a trusted colleague to share and discuss moments where bias or culture played a role in care. Choosing some media, such as podcasts, books, or videos related to culture or bias on a monthly basis and reflecting on them. Arranging team discussions about client cases or work dynamics to help identify hidden biases, unsafe language, or unequal practices. NAMB would like to acknowledge the contribution of the many people who provided extensive guidance and feedback throughout the development of these standards. If you have any questions related to the application violation of these standards or for any other questions related to your practice, please contact a nurse consultant at practiceconsultation@namb.nb.ca.